Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. Well, of course, I have to talk about the negative material planes. After our lovely exploration of the dazzling, radiant and often beautiful positive material planes, this is going to be quite a contrast. So fortify your vital spark, O brief and fragile mortal creature, as we head into the eternal hunger of darkness. While the positive energy plane is very dangerous to mortal creatures, it has nothing on the negative material plane. Even with strong magical protection, to venture here as a mortal creature is extremely unwise and should never ever be done without a very good plan to get back out again. And Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes tells us why in the entry for the dreaded Nightwalker. The moment a living being crosses over into the negative plane, a Nightwalker steps from the negative plane into the prime material plane, and it only has one thing on its to-do list, which is destroy all life. Meanwhile, the traveller who's crossed over to the negative plane found it easy enough, but now in order to get back out again, they have to convince the Nightwalker to go back into the negative plane again. If the Nightwalker is destroyed or no means is found to trick, trap or lure it back into the negative plane, the traveller is stuck there forever, or at least for as long as they can last. The barrier that prevents exit simply eats any energy or effort directed at it. The more one tries to force their way out, the harder it resists, and such struggles, like the desperate fly caught in the web, will certainly draw the attention of something truly horrific. I'll talk some more about the Nightwalkers in a while, but first, I was asked recently by a viewer how a plane that is infinite, like the prime material, positive, negative, bitopia and others, can have a border with another plane. And I found the best answer is not that it's not a physical border, like other planes all exist in the same space. They're just at different frequencies, much like the radio stations all are around us all the time, but we have to tune the antenna or turning the dial increases or decreases the length of a spool of wire attached to the external antenna. This eventually matches the exact wavelength of radio frequency you want, and the signal of electrical impulses the antenna resonates with is amplified to make the sounds we hear. For those of you who never wondered how a radio works, there you go. The cosmic planes, these alternate dimensional frequencies are not accessible to us, in reality I mean. There are indications in cosmic physics that we exist in a multiverse, but in Dungeons and Dragons, these are high frequency upper planes and low frequency lower planes, and the lowest frequency of them all is the negative material plane. As powerful as the positive plane is, the negative plane is equally destructive. If one raises their frequency to escape, the plane simply absorbs and dissipates the very mystical energy employed to do this. Of course, in D&D, we have negative energy, essentially a reverse spectrum of energy that makes no sense to the physics of our real world. But in D&D, this is no problem beaming out of the negative plane, and creatures can travel from there if they're undead, particularly the incorporeal variety. Any solid matter is more difficult to take from the plane, and it tends to simply disintegrate matter, sucking the energy out of it until it can no longer bind together in the form of mass itself. So, as you can imagine, the negative plane is utterly dark, cold, has no atmosphere. It's mostly void. However, there is a caveat to this, that the negative energy can actually make negative matter itself. There can be swirling nebulas of dust and the slowly eroding stark rocks that may once have been planets. These will be swarming with entities of pure negative energy, billions of them, teeming, silently screaming, both drawn inextricably to and eternally tormented by the psychic screams of things trapped in darkness forever. Very few of them ever escape, but when a necromancer casts a spell to animate a skeleton, one of these entities is siphoned off and bound to a suit of bones. From its perspective, the prime material world is a searing barrage of sensations and sudden mental silence. It may be that the skeleton will grip a living person's head and gouge their eyes out just to hear the mental shriek before they die. As the soul leaves the body, the skeleton sees a tiny glimmer of the ethereal plane, and the way it should have gone, the only pathway to peace, one that it will never be able to travel. So it's full of rage. When a cleric calls on divine power to rebuke and turn the undead, it is a blazing inferno and high-intensity sound that blasts out at them. The weaker spirits simply destabilize and lose any anchor to the prime material plane, being destroyed, sucked immediately back to the endless void. The stronger their anchor, the better they are able to resist this effect. But the urge to flee is very strong, even in the most powerful of them. What is really horrible about this is that one can kind of understand why the undead kill relentlessly. Which is certainly evil, yes, but they're driven by mental trauma we can barely imagine. The entry of a mortal being into the negative plane is a blazing beacon of light to the undead entities, but they're not as motivated to extinguish it, oddly enough, as if they were on the prime material, since it won't bring them any peace in the negative material plane. They may gather just to look at something because it's different, and there lies the danger. Mortal creatures don't understand that they are like a walking lantern of vital energy, heat and clear thought to the undead. But some entities, some powerful entities, gain more power and some measure of peace by exploiting and controlling other undead entities. And a mortal being can be used to lure and then trap the weaker spirits. What form these things take is pretty random, but they're all really, really horrific, like enormous spider things with 1,000 faces and no eyes, or tentacles like rotting tongues reaching out of spheres of vile, flitting fluids. Everything eats you here. Everything is draining and predatory. Everything is tormented and insane. If you die here, you join them. There is no escape, even in death. Well, there are some ways. And there are certainly artifacts here that were placed in the negative plane by other powers, such as prisons holding incredibly powerful primordials, the demi-plane realms which exist in cosmic ways as kind of garbage chutes of powerful beings. They just dispose of stuff here. The rare incursions of elemental or prime material matter that can be sucked in via some gateway spell, and of course the chance encounters with creatures from the far realm who are so outlandishly alien that they can exist even in the negative material plane. So in a nutshell, getting randomly dropped into this plane without any protection is a bit of a race to see what kills you your character the first. Will they die from the relentless hit point drain, doing 2d6 damage per round? Will they die from the DC 25 Constitution saving throw versus cumulative levels of exhaustion? Or will they die from the total lack of air? The vacuum's interesting. Ignoring the hit point drain and exhaustion for a moment, if a character doesn't hold their breath, which will cause their lungs to explode, and exhales all the air from their lungs, they will lose consciousness in about 15 seconds, and perhaps survive up to 2 minutes, even a total vacuum. As the character begins to pass out, the last sensation, aside from pain and horror obviously, is that the liquid on their tongue and eyeballs begins to bubble as it boils in the zero pressure. The skin and tissue underneath begin to swell as liquid starts to vaporize, but the body doesn't actually explode. That's just a Hollywood thing. Despite the extreme cold temperatures, heat does not leave the body quickly enough for the character to freeze before they suffocate. Again, it's another Hollywood trope. Due to the lack of convection and conduction, as there's no living microbes, they won't decompose in the normal way. Instead, the tissue is simply eroded away by the matter-destroying effect of the plane itself. So the body will slowly turn to ash. How slowly is fairly random. It could be minutes, it could be years. It depends on the strength of the negative energy in your immediate area, and we'll talk about that in a second. If you do have adequate protection from the negative material plane and its inhabitants, then there are places to go and things to see. Well, if you have really good dark vision. The creatures known as the Zagyi Enegons live here. They're the exact opposite of the Zagya found in the positive plane. There's also the Trillocs, creatures of pure negative energy, who are very rarely found in other planes but are much more common here. And it's rumoured that they actually came from another plane of existence and have now established themselves at home in the negative plane. They're composed of negative energy and they feed on it, death. There's also intelligent undead. Vampires, liches, wraiths, wights and spectres make this plane their home base. There's no weather in the realm, of course, but there is variability, just as there are areas where the negative energy seems to recede and create these so-called doldrums. Some locations exhibit concentrations intense enough to create stable chunks of solid matter that are called voidstone. This is the D&D equivalent of antimatter. These absolutely black blobs range from a few inches in diameter to something the size of a small house, and perhaps some exist that are even larger. Anything that touches a voidstone is destroyed in the span of a few heartbeats. Even the undead are not immune. This property makes voidstone a vital and extraordinarily dangerous component in the creation of magic items such as the infamous Sphere of Annihilation. Another curious and deadly property of these silent death traps is that voidstone of a certain size, not too small, not too large, are attracted to life like floating magnets and will move towards the nearest creature in jerking, uneven steps. Leaps, if you will. shuttling along through the air. The exact range of this attraction is unknown because of the limited visibility, and all reports of attempted mental control over these chunks indicates total failure. Spectacular total failure. So a word to the wise, if your character returns safely from the negative energy plane, be absolutely sure that they carefully remove all dust and grime collected from their visit there before they end any enchantments protecting them from negative energy, or the voidstone dust will most certainly kill them. Disposing of it safely is also an important safety concern and can be a real problem if trips back and forth are commonplace. The plane is just toxic. In Pathfinder, there are a couple of interesting locations on the negative energy plane. First is Eternity's Doorstep, a planet-sized sphere of perfectly smooth glass. Inscribed in every language on its surface is this statement: "What you think of life is a great deception. The faithful have already been claimed, taken and saved. You are ours." Ominous. This object is a gigantic soul trap, and apocryphal tales speak of intelligent undead screaming in horror as they sink into the sphere's surface, madly scrabbling, trying to escape the grasp of indistinct legions of shapes and shadows clouding the surface from the inside, before finally vanishing from sight forever. There is a section of mostly destroyed ancient buildings, currently the resident of some powerful liches, and those who have some impressive architectural and historic skills will be able to identify a large section of the ruins of Delhumide in Thay, torn free from Toril and thrown directly into the negative material plane by the darkest sort of sorcery over 24 centuries ago. There is a safe haven for mortal life called the Fortress of the Soul. This is constructed, heavily protected and massively enchanted, and sparsely occupied by the very highest ranking members of an interplanar faction known as the Dustmen. Inside this edifice is a portal to Sigil, the City of Doors, and this portal can only be opened once per week, so they rotate shifts, so to speak. And they're not exactly welcoming of strangers, but they will give mortals, succor. Okay, so border planes that are reachable from the negative energy plane include the quasi-elemental planes of vacuum, salt, dust, and ash. Bear in mind, these are metaphysical connections. The character still needs to use some sort of a gate spell or ethereal portal to cross between them. But anyway, here we go. The quasi-elemental plane of vacuum has no distinguishable regions, areas, or realms. No deities dwell in this plane. Few outsiders have the ability to survive here, and even fewer would wish to try. At the intersection of the plane of air and the negative elemental plane, the negative energy plane, or the negative material universe, or the plane of death, this plane represents not merely an absence of air, but an absence of anything at all. Nothing but an endless void bearing neither heat nor cold. No light can be found, but no endless darkness snuffing out that light brought in. No past, no future, no change. The plane of vacuum is the plane of nothing at all. As long as the character has some source of air to breathe, the plane won't immediately kill them. It's not freezing cold, although things don't burn here. Light and heat are not snuffed out immediately like in the negative energy plane. Vacuum is occasionally chosen as a home by powerful beings that have no real need to breathe, being an excellent location for the ultimate in privacy from such things as mortal creatures coming and bothering them. Such entities as liches and beholders seem to have a special yen for the place. They, as do incorporeal undead of all varieties that just float through the place. There's a citadel called Xaxelis, known as the Portal of Last Breath. It's a free-floating, unanchored to any solid ground, without any true borders, nor any significant islands of any solid matter floating around. The fortress is instead constructed around a portal to the negative energy plane, an ethereal conduit running between the two planes and tethering the citadel in place. This edifice was constructed and transported here by an interplanar faction known as the Doom Guard. Powerful lords of ancient kingdoms and empires occasionally order wizards to inter their entire elaborate tombs into the void plane to protect and preserve them for eternity, but they could be floating around anywhere. It's just as likely to run into the bizarre, convoluted and alien lair of a beholder, or find that the gothic monolith of an ancient tomb or vault is now the lair of a powerful lich. You just never know. The quasi-elemental plane of salt and the negative quasi-plane of water. This represents total desiccation and dehydration, that process that leaves behind only the essential solids of any substance. As with most quasi-elemental planes, it's nearly uninhabitable, but There are some native creatures that live there, and yet there are a few mortals that do manage to eke out a life in a realm that loathes fluids in all their forms. The most pressing issue in the plane of salt is the constant dehydration. Travellers to this plane grow dehydrated at a far faster rate, requiring near constant replenishment of fluids, a difficult task in a plane where the conjuration of water is so restricted. Thanks to the combination of both the plane's natural dehydrating nature and the rapid contamination of any fluids, liquids or gas, brought into the plane of salt, a person must drink nearly 5 times as much water as normal just to stay alive. And of course, the locals do not like water, so creatures that expel water constantly in the way that we exhale and get rid of it as waste products, it's potential. Basically, we're exhaling acid to them all the time because it can dissolve their bodies. Air is also brought in from without, as it can be found here occasionally in a pure elemental pocket, but as with water, any sort of air that's brought into the plane soon becomes saturated with salt, stinging the eyes and making breathing most troublesome. Those without eye protection are quickly rendered unable to see from the sting, though this fades soon after a quick wash off from the plane. Thankfully, as it does not interfere with breathing, it does make it more uncomfortable experience without some sort of a filter, but you can actually breathe the air quite often. For those many that do eventually die from the conditions on salt, the plane's influence does not stop there. It continues sapping fluids from the body, at first merely mummifying it, but within 2 or 3 weeks, reducing it even further to nothing but a fragile, unidentifiable mound of salt-like material. The exception is for those poor water-aligned souls that find themselves stranded in this plane, water genasi, marids, and the like. Their innate connection to water keeps them from drying completely, but they find themselves awakening as Desiccators, foul undead-like beings granted emanation only by the slight remnants of elemental water running through their form. It's not near enough for survival, and of course their minds are broken by it, cursing them with a thirst that can never be slaked as they wander around, basically ripping water out of any living creature that they find. Cursed and horrid creatures forever. Provided one can survive, though, salt can provide a number of boons, the most well-known of which is being rock salt, or shiobana, which, while salt may be a negative quasi-element, the mixture of and the mixture with water, the ultimate life-giving force of the 4 base elements, seems to balance this, granting the substance its noted ability to repulse the fouler varieties of spirits and exemplars. Traditional salt only has minor abilities in this vein, but pure salt from the salt crystal veins of the plane can function even more effectively. So if you spread a salt circle with elemental salt, it's much more effective at warding out like fairies and creatures that are repulsed by this sort of thing. Unfortunately, salt crystal veins are notoriously hazardous with razor-sharp edges, and these veins are able to sever a finger at the slightest contact, let alone a torso, and nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding material without a practiced eye. Of course, many other useful components can be mined in salt, of which this is but the most prominent, and as such, many peoples establish mining operations on the plane with varying degrees of success, because, of course, if you're an interplanar traveller, such a huge resource as a plane of salt is quite handy. It can also carry a great bounty and beauty for one willing to just sightsee. For the great branching spires of the shimmering forest, hidden a valley of crystal range and the cavern of lights found in a little-travelled valley of the core, to the snowflake in the depths of the saline sea, the formations of salt are near the equal of anything found in the mineral plains. Unlike what is commonly believed, salt can manifest any number of textures, and its natural translucency lends itself well to jewel-like formations. Unlike mineral formations, however, the formations of salt keep geometric perfection, both at a large scale and at the small, like great 3-dimensional ferns. It's beautiful. Where the negative energy plane intersects with the plane of elemental earth, it creates the quasi-elemental plane of dust, home of the dune stalkers, sandlings, and sandmen. From the border of the plane of earth, the solid rock cracks and splits into smaller and smaller pieces, losing cohesion and variation until nothing is left except fine sand. At the same time, the pressure experienced in the earth plane is reduced to normal, but there's no breathable atmosphere. Continuing on, the grains get finer and further apart, and the empty blackness between the dust motes grows until finally all motes are dispersed and only negative energy is left. Here the Doomguard built their favourite tower, the Citadel of Xaxelis. The disassociation and dispersal properties of the plane act on anything solid that lacks protection. In a matter of minutes, non-native items and creatures, including beings from following neighbouring inner planes, that are at least partially solid will break down and drift apart past the point of where life is sustainable. So it's a very dangerous plane to linger in for long without adequate protection. Between the planes of negative energy and elemental fire is the quasi-elemental plane of ash. Moving from the plane of fire, the last embers die out, leaving the cold remnants of combustion hanging in the gloomy atmosphere. The temperature drops quickly to a bone-chilling cold. All light from the plane of fire is gradually blocked from view, and the ash steadily thickens toward the negative energy plane until it ends in an enormous grey wall in the darkness at the border. Vision is limited and breathing impossible without assistance of some sort. This plane will leach the warmth out of any creature with a body temperature above freezing, especially natives of the fire, smoke and magma planes, which will die in a matter of minutes. Creatures of ash shun warmth because their bodies can explode into lumps of ash, even as if just brought to a normal room temperature. They just go poof and explode. Another of the Doomguard strongholds, the skull-shaped Citadel of Xaxelis, is here at the border of the plane of negative energy. They tend to call it the plane of death, the Doomguard do. But it was taken over by the Lich Vecna long ago. They subsequently built a replacement and named it the Crumbling Citadel, a lesser place which they think of as a staging post so that they can retake the Citadel of Xaxelis once more. A lofty dream. Some parts of the plane are like massive soot-clogged floating rock fields and can support a thriving community of asteroid belters who mine the minerals and trade for any other goods, building their main trade, the industrial hubs around gateway portals. But of course, it's not a hospitable place. They don't tend to live here long term. Okay, finally, as promised, the Nightwalkers. First off, the Nightwalker is a type of nightshade, which also includes the Nightcrawler, a massive behemoth similar to a purple worm, though utterly black in colour. The Night Haunt, which are gargoyle-like and drawn to places of evil power and defiled goodness. The Night Swimmer, an aquatic nightcrawler. The Night Wing, bat-like flyers that hunt on the wing. And of course the Nightwalkers, which are giant humanoids. The Nightshades have been around since Dungeons & Dragons Master Rules, published in 1985, but appeared in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 3.5 and 4th edition. They've always been huge creatures composed of darkness and evil. The image for them in the 5th edition Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes is suitably terrifying. Certainly, the poor victim in front of the Nightwalker looks to be in the process of dying where he stands. They are 20 feet tall, weigh 12,000 pounds and have a 15-foot reach. They are fast, silent and extremely deadly, able to stride about or more commonly simply float along, feet not touching the ground with an ordinary movement speed of 40 feet per round. They have an armor class of 14 and around 300 hit points and are resistant to acid, fire, cold, lightning, thunder and any non-magical weapon damage. They have complete immunity to necrotic and poisoned. Dark vision to 120 feet. They don't talk. They don't need to. They have a number of devastating attacks they employ. First is an aura of annihilation, reaching around 30 feet around it. Any creature that starts its turn in that zone must make a DC 21 Constitution saving throw, or take 46 necrotic damage, and they grant the Nightwalker advantage on attacks against them until the start of the next turn. Any creature reduced to 0 hit points by the Nightwalker by any means dies and cannot be revived by anything less than a wish spell. The soul of the victim doesn't go on to its destined cosmic afterlife. It gets sucked into the negative material plane to suffer for all eternity in the maelstrom of screaming spirits. In theory, the Nightwalker is gaining some pleasure from eating these souls, but nobody really knows. What is known is that the Nightwalkers will chase after the living to kill them, so they can be directed somewhat using live bait. They attack by innovating their victims, plus 12 to hit, doing 5d8 plus 6 necrotic damage, and the victims must make a DC 21 Constitution saving throw or their hit point maximum is reduced by the amount of damage they took. If they survive, they can recover with a long rest, but it's very nasty. They also have an attack which recharges in a roll of 6 on a 1d6, called Finger of Doom, which is when the Nightwalker looks at a victim, points at them, and if they're within 300 feet and fail the DC 21 Wisdom saving throw, they take 46 necrotic damage and become frightened as well as paralyzed until the Nightwalker's next turn. In older versions, Nightwalkers could destroy objects just by picking them up and crushing them in their hands. Even magic items were not safe from this destruction, except for magic artifacts. So feel free to roll a strike, grab a weapon, shield or something, and then the player gets to make the object saving throw with whatever enhancements it has for its enchantment, or it gets destroyed right in front of their eyes. They can also summon a fair number of undead, much like a fiend, and they tend to travel with various bodaks, wraiths, and other powerful undead. Feel free, they don't just walk around by themselves, They quickly gather the undead to them as beacons of evil. Okay, better stop there. I could go on in some detail about the various undead. The negative material plane is their source of power. In itself, negative energy is neutral. It doesn't care for good or evil, law or chaos. It only seeks to devour all that is, reducing the multiverse to cold, lifeless ruins. But that's just math as far as the cosmos is concerned. Thanks for listening. I'll be back with more for you very soon. Just a reminder, if you're not subscribed already, feel free to do so. Click that like button. Be sure to hit the notification bell as well, as I upload at strange hours of the morning. For access to all the scripts and occasional special offers, consider becoming a patron of the channel on Patreon. For a minimum of just $1 a month, you get access to all of my scripts. And join the community on our Discord server. Come say hi. I chat with them fairly frequently. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll catch you again soon.